Okay, I have everything ready to go. I don't think I messed anything up, so let's finally turn on our net vision. I can't imagine how long this thing has been waiting to be activated. I also took the liberty of switching to my HD mic. Not bad, that actually worked first try. We'll see if it lets me connect to the actual servers though. Oh, very nice. Reminds me of the old Windows intro sound.
Sir, they've been too much ground. We must warn the others immediately. I will alert the general. Stand your ground, Lieutenant. Tell your troops to fortify the artillery. Incoming! Incoming! Sir, we have little time. The enemy has already broken through the... Sir. What I am doing is not of your concern, Commander. Now, what's the matter? Our defenses have been completely compromised by the enemy forces, sir. We have little time left. The artillery has been fortified, but that won't be enough to stop them now. I suggest we move the troops immediately. We must execute a full retreat. I knew this thing would come. Listen, it's too late to do that now. We have to take matters into our own hands. Then, so be it. May God bless you, sir. Now, you may be asking, why are you on the border of France commandeering a trench battalion in an active war zone? Okay, well, that's a complicated question. But the short answer is that I may have made a little video a while ago that made a few people a bit upset. So, after releasing the Walten Files review, I got a very mixed reception from all sides. Of course, being a review of a series that's seen as the epitome of the genre by most casuals, it sparked quite a lot of anger in people, which I expected, you know. But the Walten Files also has a very, well, ravenous fanbase, so obviously that contributed to it. Being a review of a series that's virtually never received any serious criticism, at least in video form, also didn't help. You'd be hard-pressed to find an actual review of the series on this site that isn't mine. And no, summaries disguised as video essays don't count. It's been a couple months now, and that's given discussion some time to marinate. Thankfully, a good chunk of the comments were pretty great, and I'm happy that the video sparked a lot of interesting discussions around the series. I want to thank those who took the time to deconstruct the review and provide their own unique perspectives. However, I can't ignore that the discussion kinda got shifted to the wayside by irate Walten fans. And to a certain extent, I can't blame a lot of them for coming to defend a series they're obsessed with when they feel it's being attacked, since the majority are still children. And feel is definitely the right word, since almost all of them just saw the thumbnail on Twitter. You know, it's a shame, because if they watched it, I think most of these guys would understand and recognize its points. I'll take a look at a handful of comments. Most bring up misconceptions that I want to debunk, or they're simply ones I found noteworthy. Oh.
I feel like you were making good points, showed you know what you're talking about and got me to look at the Walten Files with a different perspective. However, you lost me because of the holier-than-thou vibe I got. You say it's fine for people to have their opinions but act like yours are better and continue to insult the ones you don't agree with. You can criticize something or someone without being rude. Unless this is some kind of persona that's gone over my head, I find it doesn't come across as very welcoming, charismatic or constructive for potential new viewers like me.
I received a lot of comments like this one, and I find them quite interesting. Nowhere in the review do I insult anyone's opinions, nor do I believe that mine is the superior one. I'm not exactly Scorsese over here. Making jabs at the series or the buzz surrounding it isn't equivalent to insulting opinions. I think people simply assumed that I did this based on the at times jokey or cocky nature of my writing. I cannot stress this enough. While the Walten Files does have a lot of objective flaws that can be backed up by clear evidence, I never insulted anyone for enjoying it personally, and I even like certain aspects of it. On the other hand, I completely understand why someone would be turned off by my more jokey attitude, and that's totally fine. But a thing I don't think people like this understand is that you're allowed to make constructive criticism of a piece of art while also joking about it. Being kinda rude to something doesn't instantly invalidate your points, nor make your critiques not constructive. As commenter Squeaks the Corgi put it, sometimes criticism is delivered harshly, but it's still something to learn from.
7 months late to the party, but it does look piss me off that people keep saying they're just making fun of the series without giving any real criticism or it's insulting Martin's art skills when you literally not only say Martin is a good cartoonist several times and just talk about the TVF art style and the entire character design segment where you literally explain your problems with it as someone with experience.
Constructive critique doesn't mean just being nice to someone, which is a strange view some of these people seem to hold. It simply means that you're actively helping someone improve or advance with your points, which in my review does ring true as it's filled with constructive advice.
Jesus Christ, just say has a rage beta. It wasn't a review, has French, and has afraid to be humbled like all other apexes.
Well, does commanding a French battalion make me a Frenchman?
The Walten Files is not a masterpiece, but it is not a terrible series. I agree with you about the first episodes being quite bad, but the third and fourth episodes are good. I think the reason you didn't like the series is because you have already watched many analog horror films, making you realize how cheap horror is. But an average viewer of the series can be scared by these types of scenes, although the fans like the series mainly for the story.
This commenter mentions that a reason I didn't enjoy the series is because I've watched a lot of analog horror already, making the cheapness of the scares more apparent. Now, wouldn't that make my take on it more educated or perhaps informed than a more casual viewer? I think that's what this commenter was saying, but they phrased it in such a way that it almost sounds negative. Either way, I think this person makes a good point, either inadvertently or not, which is that people should have a more educated and varied palette of analog horror in order to better understand why series like this are divisive. This is lacking in today's sphere, which is sadly dominated by channels that endlessly praise pretty much anything, and hordes of viewers that just parrot what they say. Okay, I think that's everything for now. There's a few things I might have missed, but I'm not gonna make a standalone comments video. That's extremely stupid. Anyways, in part 1 of this review, I briefly explained what this part was going to be about, but I'll summarize since it has been a pretty long time. I'm going to perform an in-depth breakdown of how I personally revamped the visuals and structure of the Walten Files to make the series more cohesive. First, I'll do a much more detailed analysis of the current Showstoppers designs, their improvements on the first generation, and provide 2 redesign proposals. The first will be my personal redesigns, which I created with the mindset of starting from zero. The second will be the tweaked versions of the current Showstoppers, with changes Martin could realistically make now, instead of full-on redesigns. After that, I'll move on to the series' actual structure. I'll go episode by episode, excluding the minisodes and other related short films, breaking down the flaws in the structure and events, and how I tweak or rearrange them. I'll try to keep as much of Martin's original vision as intact as possible, but I'll also try to make the earlier episodes more consistent with the series' new style. So, let's get to work, and hopefully not accidentally kickstarting a massive European conflict. As I demonstrated in the first part of this review, I have a very complex love-hate relationship with the Showstoppers. Why? Well, it mainly comes from a place of frustration, because it is so excruciating seeing how genius the cartoon renditions are compared to the frankly awful original designs. If you want to refresh your memory on my thoughts on the originals, you can go back to the first part. But in summary, saying those first designs are bad is an understatement. They are atrocious, and they weigh down the already rough first half of the series. This is a sentiment that even the crew has, and that's why they decided to completely revamp the cast shortly after episode 4. You might be wondering why I barely mentioned the revamps in the first section and focused on the originals. It's simply because we hadn't really seen them in any major capacity up until that point, and when I made that video, the originals were still the main designs. But now, with the release of more content and a brand new minisode showing them off, I can safely say that these are now the actual designs. And man, I've got to say a lot about them. For starters, let me just say, the difference in quality and artistry between the originals and these is immense. It's almost hard to believe that these were the original designs just a couple months ago. The truth is, Martin's art direction on the Walten Files, and pretty much just his art in general, has improved dramatically since episode 4. Everything is far more detailed and refined, and every asset in the series now has a far more consistent photo batch style. There is now actual visual consistency, as opposed to the clashing styles of the first episodes. As for the bots themselves, they are not only more elaborate, but also much more streamlined and less amateurish. This also helps with their scare factor, as all of their faces have been given a much needed retooling, making them less goofy and more soulless, hollow, and cold, which I imagine was Martin's original intention when making Mr. Pinhead over here. Man, a lot of these revamps are seriously good. Like, really, props to Martin and the team because these are awesome. But that doesn't mean that these designs are perfect, as they're still pretty flawed and carry a lot of the old issues, at least in my opinion. First and most obvious of all are their proportions, which, while less egregious on certain characters, feel extremely overblown in others like Bond. Bond has sort of evolved over the years to feature a much more tanky and imposing stature, and in certain shots it can look really great, but I think Martin should tone it way down because in my opinion this is just way too much. Like seriously, these proportions are ridiculous, look at this! Not even Kingpin's built this tanky. The structure of their faces can also still look goofy at times, as their features are still way too misaligned. Lastly, the animatronics still bear very little resemblance to their cartoon counterparts, and I think there's a lot of untapped design potential in bridging the gap. So, finally, with all that in mind, let me present to you redesign option number 1, my personal redesigns. Before showcasing the rest of the redesigns, I want to show off Bond first, as he encapsulates my philosophy quite well. I should preface that I am not claiming that these are superior in any way than the second-gen designs, and like I said, I actually really like them. These are simply my personal takes on the characters, tackling a lot of the issues I identified. These are the 4 core problems I wanted to address: their goofy proportions, their lack in visual fidelity, non-existent synergy with the cartoon versions, and their 70s versions not being appealing mascots. For starters, the first thing you'll notice right away are the tweaked proportions. There's a lot to break down here, but I'll start with this. You'll notice that compared to the current Bond, which is pretty much built like a fridge, and even the original, which has a much more rounded figure, my Bond, and by extension the rest of my designs, are more lean and agile. This was done to combat the fact that, simply put, the original Showstoppers just had really odd and misshapen proportions. And compared to the new ones, which are much better but still slightly off, the original's body simply didn't convey uncanniness or fear. My Redesigns proportions are designed to fit much more in line with the cartoon ones, as they're way lankier and more lean. I am aware that a huge aspect of Bond's modern design is his imposing stature, and you'd think that'd be lost with the design, but I don't think it is. Sure, he's lankier, but he still has a menacing stance, and he's quite boxy and heavy near the shoulders. This idea of fitting more in line with the cartoon versions is one of the main pillars of my philosophy. As I've made very clear in the first part, the cartoon Showstoppers are amazing, and their designs are infinitely better than the robots, or at least the originals. It always struck me as odd that the bots in the cartoons look so different, and with my versions, I wanted to have the best of both worlds. So what I did was, I made the clean versions of the designs much more reminiscent of the cartoon Showstoppers, giving them their accessories, color schemes, and even some of their features, but at the same time, keeping the original facial structure as intact as possible. This instantly made them feel more vibrant and lively, and these changes make them look more like friendly mascots, while still keeping that air that something isn't right. However, for the 1980 rendition of my Bond, I decided to apply the opposite mindset. For his old version, and by extension the rest of the designs, I decided to make the colors match Martin's original weather renditions, almost as if the friendly veneer is running away to reveal their true colors. I also matched the tears in the fabric with the originals for all the cast. You'll also notice that underneath these guys is a brand new mech. The original mech from the series is pretty alright, but it definitely suffers because of the very wobbly and loose style. My main issue with it is how simple and bare it is, and with this new rendition I wanted to make it much more interesting. You'll see with Bond here that, basing ourselves off Gen 2 Bond, I also fill the void in his stomach with a visible mech, which adds some nice detail. The mech itself is designed to harken back to real designs, like Showbiz Pizza Mechs for example. I think making it more realistic adds some much needed physicality and richness to the designs, which was otherwise lost with the more fantastical and bare mech. That also brings me to my last point, at least for Bond, which is how in making the characters more akin to their cartoons and adding more grounded detailing, we can bring out that sense of stiffness and coldness even further. The majority of the points I've made apply to the rest of the Showstoppers, but let's quickly go one by one and discuss a bit of my process for each. Shaw was the second animatronic I did. Shaw probably has my favorite face out of the cast, and it's really weird and disturbing, but held back, so I wanted to amp that up more while improving her weaknesses like the body. Her new face is a very big improvement, but I think it still falls a bit short, so for her, it was important to keep that face intact. So after tweaking the face to be more hollow and better proportioned, I made her body much more reminiscent of the cartoon, added some accessories, and she was finished. I really like the contrast between both versions. You'll notice that the 70s versions of my designs usually have the cartoon features, while the 80s versions resemble Martin's wizards. After Shaw, I designed Banny. Her original design is probably, in my opinion, the weakest of the original renditions, so it's great that she's the one that received the most effective glow-up. However, it still could be so much better. Banny sort of has the opposite problem Shaw did, so having Shaw's body to reuse, I decided to focus on the face. And man, I think it paid off, because honestly, I think she's one of the most effective redesigns. I'm quite proud of the duality of her, having a very friendly 70s design, while her withered version looks demented and dead, without tweaking too much really. I think that's something Scott Cawthon aced with his FNAF designs, and a principle many miss. Her eyes are hollow and glazed over, almost zombified, and her mouth, with the removal of the tongue and loosening up, looks more mindless. These are details that are present in every design. Buzu was one of the characters that needed the most touch-ups. His original version is not the worst design of the set, but he is probably the most loose and undetailed. You can tell Martin ran out of steam with him. Buzu practically needed an entire restructuring, and I'm very satisfied with how he came out. His body is much more uptight and regal, and his face is a fusion between the cartoon version structure and the originals, looking much more friendly, while still giving off a spooky nutcracker or puppet vibe. Buzu's unwithered version is quite ineffective as well, so with mine I made sure to make him look more broken and unkept, sort of like those abandoned cowboy animatronics you see sometimes. And finally, the last redesign I did was Billy. Billy is a weird case, because out of the originals, he's probably the most normal looking design, having quite an unsettling look to him. But now, compared to the rest of the second generation, he's no longer the uncontested champion. Billy has always puzzled me, because there's pretty much no way in hell Bunny Smiles would put such a bare and rudimentary mascot on their stage. Maybe that's the point of him. I doubt it, but it's possible. But either way, his face needed more visual interest, but it still needed to stay hollow like the original. So basing ourselves off his cartoon appearance, I added his unsettling white pupils and sprinkled more dashes of color. His wither design is one I'm super proud of, as it's a mixture of this new one with the good elements of the past one. His rubber mask almost looks as if it's rotting off. To bookend this section, here's some more beauty shots of the redesigns. With that done, it's time to move on to the second proposal redesign, which isn't a redesign for as much as it's a retooling. I should note that this isn't as elaborate as the redesigns, but my goals did remain the same. However, instead of making them from scratch, this is simply a retool of the second generation. This is Bond's retooling. I didn't redo every character, by the way, just a single one to illustrate my point, but every character would essentially have the same changes. Bond's new design is actually ridiculously good. It's much scarier, imposing, and menacing than the previous one by a long shot. But like I said, it's very held back. These changes serve to basically cut those restraints and elevate the elements already present. First off, I tweaked the proportions slightly, making his head less like a Goomba from the Mario movie and more normal-sized. His face was already practically perfect, and even though Martin still hasn't moved away from his old method of drawing faces, which often made his characters look sloppy and strange, Bond completely lacks it here, which I really respect. I also made his arms just a smidge less bulky, but I still kept them mostly the same. Finally, I added some more detail to his feet and hands, as they seem to be practically the same as his old versions. They look quite strange compared to the rest of the design, which is filled with so much rich detail and texture. I'm especially in love with the wires coiled around his arms. That's just an awesome detail. His face is also all sorts of fucked up, with a ton of scars around his eyes. That just gives him so much more personality. This design is just filled with so many little improvements like that. In conclusion, these designs, while still not perfect and at times very wonky, are an incredible next step. Bond is clearly my favorite, but every other design carries a lot of those great elements. Martin is slowly but surely improving as an artist, and discovering what he truly wants the series to be in the process, which leads us into the final section. The Walten Files is a series that has a lot of untapped potential, yet falls short of it due to a variety of factors. One of its main problems is its art direction, as while it's improving, it still doesn't look quite as good as it could. However, its second largest issue by far is its format and direction. But what do I mean by that exactly? Well, I'm essentially referring to how the episodes are structured and directed. That encapsulates everything from how scenes play out to how they look, etc., etc. In this section, I'll go through all currently released main episodes of the series and give suggestions on how to improve the following three aspects: the inconsistent and oftentimes nasty visuals, the reliance on cliches over creative scenes, and the strange usage of the found footage / analog horror format. Episodes 1 and 2 are probably the most flawed episodes from the series. Being the first, they're filled with a lot of amateur choices that the current team simply wouldn't do today. Well, maybe that's not entirely true. As I mentioned in the first part, its most egregious characteristics hit you instantly, as these early episodes feature the early style of the series, which is muddy, gross, and at times extremely sloppy. In this theoretical Walten Files reboot, the style for all episodes would need to be completely overhauled. I'll give you two proposals over here. One, using realistic but still slightly stylized art direction to make the series feel more tangible, or second, incorporating Martin's current photobatch style, which, while still looking super janky at times, works substantially better than the old style, and it at least has visual cohesion. Both styles have their positives and negatives. While the live-action realistic style will make the series feel much scarier, atmospheric, and graphic, like a proper analog horror, it would lose some of that unique style it's cultivated over the years, even if the realistic one would keep elements of stylization. The series' photobatch is an extremely unique style that's not often seen in the YouTube horror sphere. What we've seen of its most recent incarnation shows that Martin has upgraded it since episode 4, and I'll admit that its janky and uneven nature works very well for the bots now. When it tries to emulate real footage in any way, it just falls flat and completely breaks the illusion. Martin can use this style all he wants for more traditional cinematic moments. It actually doesn't look that bad. It reminds me of David First stuff. The series is already moving away from analog horror anyways, but for found footage sequences, it flat out doesn't work at all. Much like how 2D cartoons struggle with making natural handheld footage, what we've seen of it looks stilted and awkward, similar to the series' early handheld scenes. And it's likely another reason why Martin is moving away from analog horror. Episode 1 follows a traditional found footage format, with the episode itself being a collection of tapes Anthony has collected. This serves as a decent introduction to the story, but where it falls short is in the execution of its scares. As I made evident in part 1, all of the scares in episodes 1 to 3 are obscenely childish and uninteresting, and they don't take advantage of the format at all. They fall into the stereotypical FNAF Squimpus McGwimpus category, where they're quite obviously lazily added in with no real thought or creativity. I said this before, but I don't really blame Martin for doing this, since not only was this a popular style at the time, he was also still coming into his own. There's lots of ways to creatively reimagine these scares in ways that tie them into the found footage. For example, in the cartoon, instead of having an obnoxiously on-the-nose appearance from Sophie that makes no sense, and that's really the keyword for these, obnoxious, why not try and meld it more naturally into the footage? We could have the cartoon be more corrupted and unstable, having it play out completely normally, and at the end reveal that the narration was done by a younger Sophie. Hell, you could even make the cartoon's little storyline involve a kid similar to her, or make it a subtle nod to events that will happen in the future. Maybe involve pills in it? Changes like this make the scares feel more believable, natural, and unsettling. The same philosophy applies to episode 2 since it has the exact same format, and pretty much the rest of the series. Episode 3 is a much more complex problem to tackle though, as it suffers from more issues than amateur visuals or cheap scares. The first tweak I do is making Bunny Farm much more reminiscent of actual arcade games. One of my biggest gripes with episode 3 was how the actual game looked, as not only was its style quite jarring and inconsistent, it also missed a lot of opportunities in going with its Andy's Apple Farm Scott Cawthon style. I said this before, but if the game looked more like how real arcade games did at the time, it'd significantly amplify both the atmosphere and the horror. To be honest, a lot of those old games had frankly terrifying sprite work, and there's so much rich potential there. Another massive issue Bunny Farm has is both its pacing and its actual scares. Much like most of the early series, this episode is jam-packed with horrible, in-your-face, annoying analog horror screamers, which are genuinely, more often than not, just flashing the foreign faces with a loud noise in the background. These screamers are a core part of this episode, as they're the moments when Showbear reveals the truth to Sophie. This is a suggestion I made in the last video, but these moments could work much better if they were properly integrated into the story itself, instead of just being the same shtick Martin had been pulling since the first episode. In Banny's segment, we get a brief moment where Sophie plays a minigame Showbear's reshaped to reenact Susan's death. If this idea had been expanded, it could have made the film so much better. If we implement it into the rest of the big reveals in this reboot, replacing the obnoxiousness of the screamers, which leaves zero room for interpretation, it makes for more subtle and creative storytelling. We can add on to this further by making these moments corrupted versions of the Bunny Farm minigames that slowly but surely morph into reenactments of the deaths, all in a more tasteful way. Episode 4 is probably the one that needs the least tweaking, as in my opinion it's the best episode of the series so far. The only things I'd change would be some of the art direction, and the structure of the found footage segment at the start. The cinematic portion of this episode is amazing and I adore it, ignoring how it looks. The visuals in this episode are a much more rudimentary version of the ones seen in the series' more recent outings, such as the Hotline short, which I adored. If you haven't watched it yet, go do it, because it points to the much brighter future that the series has ahead of it. It's tense, the shot compositions are awesome, Bond is terrifying, that stupid phone thing is so mystery flushed, but man, I love it. If episode 4 and beyond have this more cinematic style, with hints of found footage sprinkled in, then sign me up. This is what Martin excels at, and he knows it. Man, that use of the camera was so creative, even if it still looks like Click Team. Beyond updating the style to fit more in line with the series' recent outings, overhauling the found footage segments would be our top priority. It literally makes no sense that this is framed as a DVD bonus features menu, since this is supposed to be a VHS tape of some sort. So I think just making it a documentary style tape with each segment one after the other would work better. Martin chose to add a lot of abrupt and jarring cuts to black during the sequence, which were likely added haphazardly to make otherwise mundane scenes more scary. We can remedy this by just making the tape much more corrupted. Lord, that was exhausting. Well, I think I can finally be at peace. Now, where was I? Oh God. Wait, what is that? Oh, no, you gotta be kidding. This was just crude, man. Aryan Files?
Im Veteran of the found footage genre, yeah, because I'm sure you were out there posting Nick flooding incidents when Cannibal Holocaust released. You fundamentally misunderstand the Walten Files by giving it the tag of found footage when it's not even trying to be found footage, bro. Analog horror and found footage are two completely different styles, and the fact that you purposefully misclassify the Walten Files as something it isn't just to criticize it for doing things it's not trying to do makes it look like you're just a bum who's envious of its success.
This dude is going crazy. It's just a video, son. Chill. Also, when did I say I was a veteran? I am a war veteran, but that's different.
It's like if I went to Burger King claiming it was a pizza joint, didn't get any fucking pizza, and then criticized it because the burger shop didn't give me any fucking pizza.
Ooh, okay, I like this one. This one's spicy. This commenter brings up a worryingly common misconception I saw often here, which is that a lot of viewers seem to think that analog horror and found footage are completely separate. Ignoring the fact that I gave a pretty concise explanation as to why this isn't the case in the video, this is a really easy error to debunk by yourself. Let's start with the definitions. Wikipedia literally states in the first sentence of their article that, quote, analog horror is a subgenre of horror fiction and an offshoot of the found footage film genre. TVTropes.com states that, quote, analog horror is a horror web original subgenre of found footage. Backstage.com mentions that found footage is an inherent part of analog horror. And if that wasn't enough evidence for you, let's look at the series itself. The first episode is literally all found footage / analog horror, same as the second episode. This is not only evident by the episodes themselves, but also stated in the description. The third episode is entirely a found footage film, and episode 4 is literally half found footage. And while the series has been shifting away from the format, mainly in this episode, guess what? It still has found footage / analog horror. Just because it has some traditional sequences doesn't mean it magically isn't that anymore. I'm aware that the series has plans to shift away from the genre, but even after that shift happens, not only will the series still keep elements of found footage, those first episodes will still exist? How could anyone possibly say this with all that in mind? Did this guy even watch the series? And generally, what the fuck do these people think analog horror is? Do they think it's just a spooky face and black backdrop with a VHS filter?
It's almost like she's on tranquilizer type pills that ruin her reactions, something that could have been seen by doing 2 minutes of research.
This is a smaller one, but it's a misunderstanding I wanted to clarify. Tranquilizer type pills do not justify Sophie's nonchalant and boring reactions in the episode. This was merely a result of the acting. Sophie is not even taking tranquilizers. She's taking some sort of psychoactive drug that blocks memories, not antidepressants or whatever this commenter was imagining. I don't even know where they got that idea from.
You made a Walten Files fan video 2 weeks ago, what gives, brother?
That's what people call any video based off something they didn't make, right? A fan video? I don't know, man. Just pretend I was a super big Walten Files fan, and then suddenly one day I said, hey, this actually sucks.
About 15 minutes in, and any point you could have made about the quality of the Walten Files is completely rendered null. As all I have really gotten from this video is, do me no like art style, why not the live action? Me think it more scary if live action. Like you should, but live action cost money. The creator doesn't want to do the live action. But Adam complained. Like erst it's subjective. Zweiter, going up to a piece of art and saying you wish it was a completely different media format is kinda dumb. This crybaby energy makes listening to a different opinion kinda difficult. You cannot like something while being respectful and not resorting to, come up guys, just admit it's dumb. We all know it is. But video.
I got a ton of responses very similar to this one. First of all, not only is this a gross mischaracterization of my review, I also feel the need to reiterate that simply because a review pokes fun at something you enjoy, it doesn't mean that the review wasn't respectful or valid. You can make friendly jokes about something while remaining professional and respectful, which, as discussed before, my review has done. Second, even if Martin doesn't wish for the series to be live action, or some sort of realistic stylized hybrid, which is what I actually suggested, that doesn't mean that what he wants is the optimal choice. In fact, most viewers, and even the crew especially, are unhappy with the older episodes, which undeniably have a jarring style that pulls you out of the experience. It's irrefutable that the series would greatly benefit from having a more refined style that's both scarier and less rudimentary. On another note, while analog horror that features real-life footage can be animated, don't expect people to view your series as a serious attempt at the genre. as it is conventionally real-life footage only. You can do it, there just haven't really been any examples. Unless we count the Scooby-Doo plot. However, my main issue isn't simply the fact that it's animated, but that the animation is distractingly poor. That was my point. I don't think that you can't do it. I just think that the example the Walten Files set is poor. I believe a lot of people misunderstood that. My problem isn't necessarily the fact that it's animated. Before ending off here, I want to highlight this well-written and polite response from Coraline Heck, who's a Walten Files crew member. I appreciate that at least one team member saw the review and gave their honest opinion afterwards. However, I believe some of Coraline's thoughts mischaracterize me a lot. It's boiling down my entire review to, but when you structure your video to just call the series objectively bad, and everyone who enjoys it are a bunch of pussies that eat slop, is a gross exaggeration. While the review has a comedic tone, like I said, this does not completely devalue its critiques, nor make them executed terribly. Additionally, my critiques are far more deep and multifaceted than just calling the series objectively bad, and all of my points are backed up by fair, clear evidence. I think it's odd that Coraline focuses so much on the calling them pussies part as if it was a prominent aspect of the review. Let me clarify. While that was a joke in my video, it was there for a fraction of a second. And it's not like I said this throughout my entire review. Additionally, that specific line is taken out of context, as in that moment, I referred to the analog horror zeitgeist as a whole, not any specific fan.
If you find this kind of stuff scary in any way, that's fine. You're kind of a pussy though, but that's okay. We can debate the actual scare factor of analog horror cliches all day, but I think we can all agree that they're kind of cheap, right?
I find it worrying that so many folks in this community are seemingly incapable of absorbing a critique of something they like the second it dares make a joke. Keep in mind, my review is not that mean to this series. I joke about it, but in moderation. I could have been meaner and unfair to it. Anyone who's watched it can tell you I praise and compliment Martin as much as I joke. Mind you, Coraline's example is practically the only joke directed at analog horror fans in the entire video, and it wasn't even directed at Walten Files fans. The rest are jabs at the series or the YouTube culture surrounding it. So that means that all of these commenters who aren't even crew members like Coraline, who at least has an excuse to complain, feel personally insulted by these really dumb jokes at the series, so much so that they fixate on it in their critiques. Don't get me wrong, these fans have all the right in the world to express their dislike of the review. I'm not saying they don't. However, it seems less to me like this group genuinely believes the jokes make the critiques fall short, and more that they simply feel personally attacked by them, which in all fairness is fine, but it is still extremely immature and childish behavior. This discussion between commenters Dudes, Wagmaster, and Irontail puts it best. I believe folks like this have confused pleasant or encouraging with constructive. The review gives advice and solutions constantly, but the problem is their judgment was clouded because on some level, these jokes, and in some cases my critiques, hurt them, and they see them as a personal attack of a thing they like. This caused these people to intentionally ignore the actual review and just focus on the parts that they felt insulted their tastes, because it's the only thing they're choosing to retain from it. Coraline's point is that the jokes in my review alienate fans of the series. But let me ask you this. Should these fans really be getting this focused on such tame, dumb gags that aren't even directed at them? Especially when my review has more to say than just Walten Files objectively bad? All I'm gonna say is, this speaks more to the character of this community than it does mine. With these changes, we've now turned the Walten Files, a series brimming with potential but held down by a myriad of issues, into a truly unsettling found footage horror. We've analyzed, reviewed, and finally redesigned the Walten Files. So, What now? Will I make more analog horror reviews in the future? Well, maybe. The thing with this review is that it's pretty much a one-off. I don't intend on doing more analysis like these. I post my work on this channel first and foremost. However, I do have a lot of analog horror series that I like to do in-depth reviews on in the future. And by a lot, I mean a lot. So who knows? Maybe this won't be the last time I do a review like this. Maybe some series out there will piss me off enough to cause me to make one again. You know I just killed like 20 million people with this horror, right? You know how expensive this stuff was? There's like 10,000 dead Frenchmen mounted in a pile over there.